You have 30 days to tear down that ugly wall, or we'll sue you for everything you've got.
Last week, the HOA president waved the letter in my face at the neighborhood meeting. It's ruining our curb appeal. Nobody wants to live next to a bunker. I tried to warn them. I'm a retired Army Corps engineer. I know floods, but they just laughed. 100-year flood here? Impossible. Less than a week later, I'm standing dry inside my house, watching through the window as the same woman wades through waist-deep muddy water, banging desperately on my door.
Please, let us in! Our house is flooding! Everything's gone!
The whole street is underwater, cars floating, expensive homes filling up fast. My ugly wall held perfectly, not a drop inside. And now? I've just discovered where our HOA fees really went. The money meant for better drainage never made it there. Karma doesn't wait long. What's your worst HOA story? Drop it below and tell me where you're watching from. Here's how a simple house purchase turned into war with the most corrupt HOA in Colorado. 3 weeks ago, my wife Elena and I moved to Willowbrook Estates. You know the type, where every house looks like it was copy-pasted by an architect with zero imagination. This upscale development sits in what used to be natural floodplains, about 30 miles outside Denver. We specifically picked the corner lot because it sat 8 feet higher than the rest. When you've spent 20 years with the Army Corps of Engineers managing flood control projects, you notice things like elevation and where water wants to go. The sweet smell of new construction lumber couldn't quite mask that other scent, the musty, earthy smell of creek silt. Most people wouldn't catch it, but I knew that smell meant trouble. It meant water had been here before, and it would be back. Elena was still recovering from 18 months of cancer treatments that had nearly killed her twice. She'd kicked cancer's ass, but the chemo left her exhausted and fragile. Moving was already stressful enough. The last thing we wanted was neighborhood drama. We just needed somewhere peaceful for her to rebuild her strength. Day 2. I'm outside checking property lines when I hear the aggressive click-clack of heels on concrete. Picture a blonde real estate Barbie in $200 workout clothes, marching up my driveway with a clipboard like she owns the place. The sound of her designer shoes hitting wet pavement should have been my first warning. Hi there, Brandy Ashworth, HOA president. Her smile could have powered a small city, but her eyes were calculating property values. Welcome to Willowbrook. I just need to discuss a few teensy community standards with you. I'd put up temporary sandbags along the creek. Basic flood prep while researching permanent solutions. Nothing crazy, just standard core procedure. Those sandbags, she said, voice dripping fake concern, are really not in harmony with our aesthetic vision. The Architectural Control Committee requires approval for any exterior modifications. I pulled up the county flood maps on my phone. This area floods every 20 years like clockwork. 1965, 1983, 1999. I'm just being smart. Her smile twitched. Oh, honey, that's ancient history. Modern engineering has totally solved those problems. Besides, we can't have unsightly barriers ruining everyone's investment. Here's where it got interesting. I asked about the development's flood mitigation systems. You know, the expensive infrastructure that's supposed to handle all that modern engineering she mentioned. Well, that's all handled by our management company, she said quickly. Too quickly. The important thing is maintaining our beautiful community standards. She handed me a violation notice, apparently pre-written. 30 days to remove the sandbags, or we'll be forced to take legal action. I watched her BMW disappear around the corner, smelling the faint scent of her expensive perfume, mixed with diesel fumes from construction equipment still working nearby. Elena came out, saw the paperwork, and sighed. What now? Apparently, being prepared is a crime against curb appeal. That night I did what any good engineer does. Research. Flood wall designs, county building codes, HOA legal limits. Then I got curious about something else. Where exactly did our $200 monthly flood mitigation fees go? See, every homeowner in Willowbrook pays extra for comprehensive flood protection management. That's $480,000 per year from 200 homes. For a development this size, that should buy some serious infrastructure. But when I started digging through public records, HOA budgets are public information, by the way, I found something fascinating. $0 spent on actual flood protection. Not a penny. The money went to landscaping, aesthetic improvements, and administrative costs. Funny how flood mitigation became flower beds and Brandy's management fees. Elena found me at the kitchen table at midnight, surrounded by printouts. Find something good? Better than good. I found something that's going to make our HOA president very uncomfortable. 3 weeks later, that research would save our house and expose the biggest fraud in county HOA history. The next morning, I applied for a permanent flood wall permit. Completely legal, completely by the book. The county engineer who reviewed my application actually complimented the design. "Smart thinking," he said. "That creek's been trouble for decades. You're the first person in Willowbrook who's done their homework." Apparently, Brandy didn't see it that way. 2 days later, she showed up with reinforcements. 3 other HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be getting pedicures. They stood in my driveway like a suburban firing squad, while Brandy waved around a petition. The morning air carried the smell of fresh coffee from someone's kitchen, and the faint diesel scent from construction equipment working on new houses downstream. "Jake, we've gathered signatures from concerned neighbors about your construction project." She made it sound like I was building a nuclear reactor. 47 homeowners agree that your wall will negatively impact property values. I looked at the petition. Half the signatures were obviously the same handwriting. Back in my core days, we'd seen plenty of fraudulent environmental impact reports, and this had the same amateur feel. "How many of these people have actually seen my plans?" I asked. "That's not the point," snapped board member Karen Hendricks, a woman who probably thought flood insurance was a type of life vest. "The point is community harmony. We can't have everyone building whatever they want." Here's where I made my first tactical error. I tried reasoning with them. I spread my engineering drawings on the hood of my truck, showing how the wall would actually improve drainage for the whole street. The design included proper weep holes to prevent water backup and landscaping to make it blend in. The rough texture of the concrete samples felt solid under my fingers, exactly what you'd want between your house and a raging flood. "See, it's not just protecting my house," I explained. "It'll channel overflow away from everyone's foundations." Brandy barely glanced at the plans. "Jake, I'm sure your military experience is valuable, but this is a civilian neighborhood. We have different standards here." That little comment about military experience had a particular edge to it, like being a veteran somehow made me less qualified to understand civilian life. I felt Elena tense up beside me. She'd heard that tone before from doctors who dismissed her cancer concerns because she looked too young to be sick. "My military experience," I said carefully, "involved preventing floods that could kill thousands of people. I think I can handle one suburban creek." "Well," said board treasurer Mike Stevens, puffing out his chest, "maybe you should have stayed in the military if you can't adapt to civilian life." That's when Elena stepped forward. "My wife might look fragile after chemo, but she's got a spine made of titanium." "Excuse me," she said in that deadly quiet voice I knew well. "Are you seriously suggesting my husband doesn't belong in a civilian neighborhood because he wants to protect our home?" The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Even the construction noise seemed to pause. Brandy recovered first. "Of course not. We just think there are better ways to handle drainage concerns, more aesthetic ways." "Such as?" "Well, we could plant some decorative grasses along the creek bank. Maybe install some attractive rain gardens." I almost laughed. Rain gardens? For a 100-year flood? That's like bringing a squirt gun to fight a forest fire. That's when Brandy played her first real card. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of my temporary sandbags. "I've already filed a complaint with the city about unpermitted construction," she said smugly. "They'll be sending an inspector tomorrow." Now, here's something I'd learned from dealing with bureaucrats for 20 years. Always get ahead of complaints. The day after Brandy's first visit, I'd called Inspector Rodriguez myself. Professional courtesy goes a long way with county officials who deal with clueless homeowners all day. "Great," I said. "Inspector Rodriguez is a good guy. We had a nice chat about proper flood mitigation techniques yesterday." The look on Brandy's face was worth the price of admission. Her mouth actually fell open. You already talked to him?" "Of course. He's actually excited to see a properly engineered flood wall in this area. Said most people just pray and hope for the best." What I didn't mention was Rodriguez's comment about the development's drainage. Whoever designed this place was either an idiot or cutting serious corners. The HOA crew huddled together like penguins in a blizzard, whispering furiously. I caught fragments. How did he know? And this complicates things. Finally, Brandy turned back to me, her voice noticeably less confident. Well, even if the city approves your wall, the HOA still has final say over aesthetics. We'll be watching every detail. I'm counting on it, I said. After they left, Elena and I stood in the driveway, listening to the sound of creek water flowing just a little faster than normal. Think they'll back down? She asked. Not a chance. People like Brandy don't back down. They double down. I was right. The next morning, I found a dead fish in our mailbox and tire tracks through Elena's carefully planted flower beds. The gloves were officially off. The dead fish was just the beginning. Over the next week, our lives turned into a suburban psychological warfare campaign. Someone kept leaving dog waste on our driveway, always early morning, always when we were asleep. Our newspaper disappeared 3 days in a row. Elena's car got keyed in the grocery store parking lot, but Brandy was too smart to get caught doing the dirty work herself. Instead, she launched what I can only call a social isolation campaign. Have you noticed we're not getting invited to things anymore? Elena asked one evening. She was looking through the window at the block party happening 2 houses down, the one we definitely hadn't been invited to. The smell of barbecue drifted across the yard, mixed with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Elena had been looking forward to making friends in the neighborhood, especially after being isolated during her cancer treatment. The next day, I discovered exactly how deep Brandy's influence ran. Mrs. Patterson from across the street, a sweet 70-year-old who'd brought us cookies when we moved in, suddenly wouldn't make eye contact. When Elena tried to chat with her at the mailbox, she practically sprinted back to her house like Elena was carrying the plague. That evening, Elena came home from her oncology support group meeting looking devastated. What happened? I asked. Someone told the group that you're unstable, that you have PTSD and anger issues. Her voice shook with fury. They said I might not be safe at home. My hands clenched into fists. Going after me was one thing, but involving Elena's cancer support group, that crossed every line in the book. Who told them that? One of the newer members, a blonde woman who said she lived in our neighborhood and was concerned for my safety. Elena's voice dripped with disgust. She actually suggested I stay with my sister until you get help. Brandy. Of course. Because apparently terrorizing flood victims wasn't enough. She had to terrorize cancer survivors too. Here's where I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of getting mad, I got methodical. 20 years of military training had taught me that emotional responses lose wars, but good intelligence wins them. That night, I started digging deeper into Willowbrook's finances. I'd already found the missing flood mitigation money, but something was nagging at me about the insurance angle. Turns out, my instincts were right. Brandy's husband worked for Cromwell Insurance, the same company that wrote policies for every house in Willowbrook Estates. What are the odds, right? But here's the really interesting part. Every single policy had the same suspicious exclusion buried in the fine print. Pre-existing flood conditions not covered. Now, anyone who's dealt with insurance knows that's basically code for, we'll take your money but good luck collecting when you need us. But Colorado law is pretty clear about disclosure requirements. Insurance agents have to explicitly warn customers about exclusions that could void their claims. These exclusions were buried on page 47 of policies that most people never read past page 2, right next to disclaimers about alien invasions and spontaneous combustion. I called my buddy Doug Martinez, who worked for county utilities. We'd served together in Afghanistan before he got into civilian engineering. Doug, I need someone to look at a development's drainage systems, unofficially. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this place was designed to flood, and someone's making money when it does. Doug came by that weekend, ostensibly to visit old Army friends. What he found made both of us furious. Jake, these storm drains are criminally undersized. The retention ponds are in the wrong locations entirely, and that creek channeling? He shook his head in disgust. It's like they engineered this place to funnel water straight into people's basements. How bad are we talking? A decent thunderstorm will cause problems. A real flood? He whistled low. It'll be like shooting fish in a barrel. Meanwhile, Brandy escalated her campaign. She convinced the HOA board to vote on an emergency neighborhood beautification initiative that would ban all military-style defensive structures. The vote was scheduled for the next HOA meeting, but she made one crucial mistake. She sent flyers about the meeting to every house except ours. What she didn't know was that Mrs. Vanessa, the elderly Korean woman who lived on the corner, had been quietly watching everything unfold. Mrs. Vanessa had lived through the 1999 flood. It had destroyed her previous house and taught her to recognize the signs. She knocked on our door the evening before the meeting, holding a flyer and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen this movie before. "Mr. Jake," she said in careful English, "they try to vote without you knowing. But I remember the flood. I remember when the water came with no warning." She handed me the flyer. "You should be there." The meeting was tomorrow night. 43 homeowners expecting a routine vote about my problem wall. Instead, they were about to discover they were all living in a death trap designed to make someone else rich. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and industrial carpet when I walked in that Thursday night. 43 homeowners had packed into folding chairs, most looking like they'd rather be watching Netflix. Brandy stood at the front with a presentation easel, wearing her best, concerned neighbor face and enough hairspray to survive a hurricane. She'd clearly expected me to miss the meeting entirely. Her smile faltered when she saw me slip in the back with Elena and Mrs. Vanessa, but she recovered like a politician caught in a lie. "Well, let's get started," Brandy announced, clicking her pen like a tiny weapon. "As you all know, we're here to address the ongoing aesthetic concerns regarding unauthorized flood barriers that don't align with our community standards." She pulled out poster boards showing photos of my sandbags from unflattering angles, making them look like I'd built a military bunker in suburbia. A few people murmured disapprovingly. Honestly, her photography skills were almost as bad as her financial management. "These defensive structures," she continued, "create an unwelcoming atmosphere that impacts all our property values. We need to vote tonight on whether to ban such installations entirely." Board Treasurer Mike Stevens raised his hand. "What happens if someone refuses to comply?" "Legal action," Brandy said firmly. "We have the authority to enforce community standards." That's when I stood up. "Before you vote, shouldn't everyone know what they're actually voting on?" The room went quiet, except for the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I could feel 43 pairs of eyes turning toward me, like I just announced aliens had landed. "Jake," Brandy said sweetly, "this is a closed board meeting. Homeowner input isn't—" "Actually, it's an open meeting," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. "I recorded your invitation robocall. Quote, all homeowners invited to vote on community beautification measures." End quote. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been avoiding Elena all week, looked confused. "I thought this was just about making things look nicer." "It is," Brandy insisted, but sweat was starting to show through her foundation. "Jake's wall creates an eyesore that—" "My wall prevents flooding," I said calmly. "But before we talk about aesthetics, let's talk about safety. How many of you know what happened to this area in 1999? A few hands went up, mostly older residents. Mrs. Vanessa nodded grimly. I walked to the front, pulled out my laptop, and connected it to the projector Brandy had been using. "Mind if I show everyone what they're really voting on?" Brandy stepped forward. "This is highly irregular. We didn't approve any presentations." "Emergency safety information doesn't require approval," said Doug Martinez, who'd quietly entered during Brandy's speech, "especially when it concerns public welfare." Doug worked for the county, so people listened when he talked. Brandy couldn't object without looking like she was actively trying to endanger everyone. My first slide showed aerial photos of the 1999 flood. Brown water covering streets, cars floating like toys, houses with water lines halfway up their first floors. The room got very quiet, very fast. "This is what happened to this exact area 25 years ago," I said. 3 feet of water through 60% of homes. Total damage, $47 million. More murmuring, this time worried instead of annoyed. "But that's ancient history," Brandy protested weakly. "Modern drainage systems." "Let's talk about those modern drainage systems," I said, clicking to Doug's analysis. "Doug Martinez here is a county hydraulic engineer. Doug, want to tell everyone what you found?" Doug stepped forward, all business. The storm drainage for this development is 30% undersized for the number of homes. The retention ponds are positioned to fail, and the creek channeling actually increases flood risk by 40%. You could have heard a pin drop. "That's impossible," sputtered Mike Stevens. "We pay extra fees for flood protection." Here's where I dropped the bomb that was about to change everything. You do pay extra fees, $200 per month, per home. That's $480,000 annually. I clicked to the next slide showing HOA budget documents. Want to guess how much was actually spent on flood protection infrastructure? The slide showed a big fat zero. "Where did the money go?" asked Mrs. Patterson, her voice shaking. I clicked again. Landscaping, administrative fees, and consulting payments to Ashworth Property Management, Brandy's company. The room erupted like a dam bursting. People shouting questions, demanding explanations. Brandy's face went from pink to red to purple, like a mood ring having a breakdown. But I wasn't done yet. "And here's the really interesting part," I said when the noise died down. "Every insurance policy in this development excludes flood coverage for pre-existing conditions, all written by the same company, Cromwell Insurance." Someone in the back shouted, "So what? What does that mean?" "It means when this place floods again, your insurance won't pay. And the agent who sold you those policies?" I looked directly at Brandy. "Well, that would be your HOA president's husband." The silence was deafening. Then Mrs. Vanessa stood up, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "I lived through 1999 flood, lost everything. These people, they make money when we lose homes." The vote was unanimous, 43-0 to suspend Brandy immediately and demand a criminal investigation. She grabbed her purse and ran. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of Elena's pancakes and the sound of my phone buzzing like an angry hornet. Word travels fast in small communities, and apparently half of Colorado had heard about our HOA meeting from hell. The most interesting call came from Sarah Beth Wilson, an investigative reporter at Channel 9 News. "Mr. Torino, I heard you might have uncovered some financial irregularities in your HOA." "That's like saying the Titanic had a small leak," I said. An hour later, Sarah Beth was sitting at my kitchen table, her sharp green eyes scanning the documents I'd spread out like evidence at a crime scene. She was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of focused energy that reminded me of good intelligence officers. "Jesus," she whispered, running her finger down the insurance exclusions. "This isn't just fraud. This is systematic. If every homeowner is paying flood fees but getting policies that exclude flood coverage," she looked up at me, "we're talking federal charges." Elena set down coffee cups, her movements more confident than they'd been in weeks. Having the truth out in the open seemed to have strengthened her somehow. "How big are we talking?" Elena asked. Sarah Beth pulled out her phone calculator. $480,000 annually in fake flood fees, times 3 years. Plus insurance premiums on policies designed to never pay out. Conservative estimate? $2.3 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 million? "Here's what I think happened," Sarah Beth continued, spreading out the timeline. "Brandy's husband gets his company the exclusive contract for the development. They write policies with buried exclusions, knowing they'll never pay flood claims. Meanwhile, Brandy collects flood mitigation fees and funnels the money to herself through her management company. The evil genius of it made my stomach turn. Create the disaster, profit from the insurance scam, then profit again when families lose everything and have to sell cheap. "But there's something else," I said, pulling out the yellowed development contract I'd found in the county archives. The original developer was required to maintain natural flood barriers in perpetuity. When the development was completed, that legal obligation transferred to the HOA. Sarah Beth's eyes lit up like she'd just discovered gold. So Brandy wasn't just stealing money, she was violating a legal mandate to protect residents. She's been collecting specific fees for a legal obligation she never fulfilled. My phone rang. The caller ID made my blood pressure spike. Brandy Ashworth. I looked at Sarah Beth, who nodded and pulled out a digital recorder. "Jake," Brandy's voice was shaky, desperate. "We need to talk privately. There's been a huge misunderstanding about those fees." "No misunderstanding, Brandy. You embezzled nearly $500,000 meant to protect people's homes. It's not that black and white. The money went to legitimate community expenses, management costs, improvements. Your BMW lease isn't a community improvement. Silence. Then, barely a whisper. How did you... Public records. Your management company's expenses are all documented, including the kitchen renovation and the Aspen vacation home down payment. Her composure cracked completely. Look, maybe we can work something out. You want real flood protection? I can make that happen. We'll install proper drainage, upgrade everything. With what money? You already spent it on yourself. Please, Jake, her voice broke. If this becomes a criminal case, I'll lose everything. My house, my kids' college funds, my marriage. You should have considered that before you gambled with 200 families' lives. I never thought. The flood risk seemed so remote, and Meridian Development promised the drainage would handle everything. There it was. Confirmation that the development company knew about the inadequate infrastructure. After I hung up, Sarah Beth was practically vibrating with excitement. Jake, you just got her to admit conspiracy with the development company. And I've got contacts at the FBI who've been building a case against Cromwell Insurance for years. Elena took my hand. What happens now? Outside, I could hear the sound of the creek running higher and faster than normal. Now, I said, we prepare for the perfect storm. The weather forecast that weekend changed everything. Unprecedented mountain snowpack melting rapidly due to unseasonable temperatures. Flash flood warnings likely for all Front Range communities. I sat in my garage Saturday morning, surrounded by concrete samples, rebar, and engineering calculations that looked like I was planning to build a small dam. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with the metallic scent of rain in the air. This wasn't just about protecting my house anymore. It was about documenting the disaster that Brandy's greed was about to unleash. Sarah Beth arrived first, carrying enough camera equipment to film a documentary. Channel 9 wants to do live coverage during the storm, she said. Weather emergency with a corruption angle. 500,000 viewers. Will it help expose what's happening here? It'll make Brandy more famous than she ever wanted to be. Doug Martinez showed up an hour later with a county truck full of sandbags and monitoring equipment. We'd served together long enough that he could read my expression like a field manual. How's it looking upstream? I asked. Chatfield Reservoir is at 98% capacity. If they have to do emergency releases while this rain hits, he whistled low. We could see water levels not recorded since the Johnson administration. Elena came out with coffee and the determined expression I'd learned to recognize during her cancer treatment, the look that said she was ready for war. What's my mission? She asked. Document everything. Photos, video, timestamps. When this goes to court, we need proof of exactly what happened and when. That's when Mrs. Vanessa appeared at the end of our driveway, followed by an unexpected parade. Tom Bradley, the veteran from 2 streets over, carrying a military-style radio case. The Martinez family from the corner house. And most surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson, who'd been avoiding us like we had the plague ever since Brandy's character assassination campaign. We heard about flood warning, Mrs. Vanessa said simply. We want to help. Tom stepped forward, all business. Brought emergency communications. If cell towers fail, we maintain contact with county emergency services. Mrs. Patterson looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, but she spoke up anyway. I owe you both an apology. Brandy told me Jake was unstable, but after Thursday night, she gestured helplessly. Is it really going to be that bad? I pulled up Doug's flood projections on my laptop. Based on current snowmelt and the drainage systems that don't actually exist, we're looking at 3 to 4 feet of water in the lowest areas. My house is in the lowest area, Mrs. Martinez said quietly. Mine too, added Tom. Now here's something they don't teach you in engineering school. Sometimes the most important calculation is human nature. You can't save everyone, but you can give people choices. I spread out my emergency response plans. We can't protect every house, but we can create safe zones. My wall will hold. It's engineered for conditions way worse than this. We set up evacuation staging here, coordinate rescues from higher ground. Doug nodded approvingly. Military triage principles applied to civilian disaster response. The next few hours turned into the most productive neighborhood meeting in Willowbrook's history. Tom established communications with county emergency services. Doug installed automated flood gauges that would trigger phone alerts. Mrs. Vanessa organized a phone tree to warn every household, whether they wanted to hear it or not. Elena and Mrs. Patterson became our documentation team, creating a real-time record of preparation versus denial. But the most crucial preparation was legal. Sarah Beth had contacted the FBI field office in Denver. Agent Jennifer Walsh was driving down to observe how the insurance scam would play out in real time. Policies designed never to pay for the exact disaster about to happen. The timing couldn't be better, Sarah Beth explained, while helping me reinforce the flood wall. They'll witness the crime as it happens. I was mixing concrete for the final buttress when my phone rang. Brandy, of course. Jake, people are saying ridiculous things about flooding. You're not actually expecting... National Weather Service issued flash flood warnings for the entire region. Check your emergency alerts. Those are just legal precautions. Our modern drainage systems can handle normal weather events. 6 inches of rain in 12 hours isn't normal, Brandy. It's catastrophic. Long pause. Then, in a smaller voice, what should I do? Start by telling homeowners their insurance excludes flood coverage. I can't do that. It would cause mass panic. Panic might save lives. Denial will definitely destroy them. After hanging up, Elena shook her head. Think she'll warn anyone? She'd rather face a flood than a lawsuit. Sunday evening, the creek was running chocolate brown, carrying tree branches and debris from upstream communities. The sound had changed from pleasant babbling to an ominous roar. Tom's radio crackled constantly. Multiple communities requesting assistance, all units responding to flood emergencies. Agent Walsh arrived in an unmarked SUV just as fat raindrops started hammering the pavement. Mr. Torino, I'm here to document whatever you think is about to happen. I looked at the wall that would save our lives, then at the houses below that trusted their safety to Brandy's lies. Agent Walsh, you're about to witness the most expensive lesson in preparation versus denial that Colorado has ever seen. Thunder rolled across the mountains like an approaching army. The rain started at 11:47 p.m. Sunday night. Not the gentle patter you hear in movies, but the kind of aggressive drumming that sounds like someone emptying buckets on your roof. Elena and I sat in our living room, watching the creek through our back window, while Tom's radio provided a steady stream of emergency updates. Chatfield Dam releasing emergency overflow. Littleton reporting street flooding. Boulder Creek over flood stage. By 1 a.m., our creek had doubled in size. By 2 a.m., it was a brown monster carrying entire trees past our house. The sound was incredible, like a freight train that never passed. At 2:33 a.m., my phone started buzzing with automated flood alerts from Doug's monitoring system. Creek level, 4 feet above normal and rising fast. Agent Walsh was documenting everything from our kitchen table, her laptop connected to Weather Service data feeds. This is exactly what the FBI needed, she said. Real-time evidence of how the fraud plays out during an actual emergency. At 3:15 a.m., Mrs. Vanessa called from her house. Mr. Jake, water in my basement. Come over now, I said. Bring whatever you can carry. She arrived 10 minutes later with a small suitcase and a photo album, wading through ankle-deep water in what used to be our street. Elena helped her get settled in our guest room while I checked the creek level again. 5 feet above normal. My flood wall was holding perfectly, but water was starting to back up into storm drains throughout the neighborhood. That's when Brandy called. Jake! Her voice was pure panic. There's water in my garage. This can't be happening. Where are you now? In my kitchen. The water's rising fast. It's already covering the street. I could hear genuine terror in her voice, but I also remembered Elena coming home in tears from her cancer support group. Have you warned your neighbors about their insurance exclusions yet? This isn't the time for... This is exactly the time, Brandy. People need to know their policies won't cover this damage. I can't. If I tell them now, they'll blame me for everything. They should blame you. You stole their flood protection money. Through the phone, I could hear water lapping at something, probably her front door. Please, Jake, you have to help me. I'll pay back the money. I'll resign from the HOA. I'll do whatever you want. Here's the thing about emergencies. They strip away all pretense and show you who people really are. Brandy had spent months attacking my family, spreading lies about my mental health, and endangering everyone's lives for money. Now she wanted mercy she'd never shown others. I'll help you, Brandy, But first you need to call every homeowner and warn them about the insurance exclusions. I don't have everyone's numbers. You organized a petition against me. You have the numbers. Silence except for the sound of rushing water. At 4:20 a.m., Tom's radio crackled. Emergency services overwhelmed. Residents advised to shelter in place or seek higher ground. That's when the real crisis began. Mrs. Martinez called from 2 streets over. "Jake, our whole first floor is flooded. We're trapped upstairs." Then Mrs. Patterson. "Water's coming through my windows. I don't know what to do." And Mike Stevens, the HOA treasurer who'd been so eager to sue me. "My house is flooding. The fire department says they can't reach us for hours." Elena looked at me with those steady eyes that had carried her through cancer treatment. "We have to help them." She was right. Whatever these people had done, they didn't deserve to lose everything because of Brandy's greed. I called Tom. "How's the boat situation?" "County loaned us an inflatable rescue boat. It's in your garage." For the next 2 hours, Tom and I ran rescue operations from my flood wall. Elena coordinated from the kitchen, tracking who was safe and who needed help. Mrs. Vanessa, despite being evacuated herself, helped organize supplies for refugees. We pulled 12 families out of flooding houses, including Mike Stevens and his kids. Each rescue was the same story. We had no idea this could happen. Nobody warned us. Our insurance doesn't cover floods? By 6:30 a.m., we had 23 people sheltering in our house and garage. My ugly flood wall had become the neighborhood's only safe zone. Brandy never did make those warning calls. At 7 a.m., her house alarm started going off, the one that triggers when water hits the electrical panel. Through our binoculars, we could see brown water flowing through her first-floor windows. Her white BMW was completely submerged, looking like a very expensive submarine. Agent Walsh documented everything: the flooded houses, the successful rescues, the insurance policies that would never pay out, and the woman whose greed had made it all possible. "This is the clearest case of insurance fraud I've ever witnessed," she told Sarah Beth on camera. "And we're watching it happen in real time." By sunrise, Willowbrook Estates looked like a war zone. 18 houses with major flood damage, 47 cars totaled, and one HOA president whose criminal trial was about to become front-page news across Colorado. But everyone was alive. Sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. Dawn revealed the scope of the disaster. From my flood wall, I could see the entire neighborhood transformed into a muddy lake, dotted with the roofs of expensive houses. Cars floated like toys. Garage doors hung open, vomiting brown water and debris. The smell hit you first, a nauseating mix of sewage, gasoline, and rotting vegetation that made your eyes water. Sarah Beth's camera crew arrived at 7:30 a.m., just as county rescue boats were starting systematic evacuations of houses we hadn't been able to reach in the dark. The live broadcast showed a split screen. Families huddled safely in my garage versus the devastation stretching in every direction. "This is Sarah Beth Wilson reporting from Willowbrook Estates," she said into the camera, "where one man's flood preparation has become the difference between life and death for an entire community." Agent Walsh was methodically documenting everything. She'd already photographed insurance policies, recorded statements from flood victims, and collected evidence of Brandy's financial crimes. But the most damning evidence was still unfolding. At 8:15 a.m., the first insurance adjuster arrived, a nervous-looking guy in waders who took one look at the devastation and started making phone calls. I watched him through binoculars as he examined houses, took photos, and shook his head repeatedly. Mrs. Martinez, who was sharing coffee with Elena in our kitchen, saw me watching. "What's he doing out there?" "Calculating how much money Cromwell Insurance is about to not pay out." "What do you mean?" Elena showed her the insurance policy we'd reviewed the night before. "See this exclusion on page 47? It says flood damage from pre-existing conditions isn't covered." Mrs. Martinez's face went white. "Pre-existing conditions? Like what?" "Like living in a flood zone," I said, "which this whole development is, and always has been." That's when Tom called from his ham radio setup. "Jake, you need to hear this. I'm picking up Cromwell Insurance internal communications." The conversation was crystal clear. Regional manager to claims supervisor. "All Willowbrook claims are denied per section 47B. Pre-existing flood conditions exclusion applies to entire development. Repeat, 0 payouts authorized. Elena grabbed my arm. They're denying every claim, even before investigating? Because they already know this flood was inevitable, I said. That's why they buried the exclusions in the fine print. Agent Walsh looked up from her laptop. That radio intercept just gave us conspiracy evidence. They planned to deny claims before the flood even happened. By 9 a.m., word was spreading among the evacuees in our garage. Families who'd lost everything were discovering their insurance was worthless. The mood shifted from gratitude to angry desperation. Mike Stevens confronted me directly. You knew this would happen. Why didn't you warn us? I tried to warn everyone. Brandy intercepted my letters. What letters? Elena pulled out copies from our files. Your husband sent certified mail to every house 3 weeks ago. Detailed flood warnings, insurance advice, offers of help. Mrs. Patterson read over his shoulder. I never got this. None of us did, said Mrs. Martinez. Because Brandy threw them away, I said. She didn't want anyone preparing independently. The group turned toward Brandy, who was huddled in the corner looking like a wet, miserable cat. She'd been mostly silent since arriving, but now she was trapped with 20 angry families who'd just learned the truth. You threw away flood warnings? Mike's voice was deadly quiet. There were liability concerns. If people panicked unnecessarily. Unnecessarily? Mrs. Martinez's voice cracked. My daughter's bedroom is underwater. That's when Agent Walsh stepped forward with her badge. Mrs. Ashworth, I'm Agent Jennifer Walsh, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. I need to inform you that you're under federal investigation for mail tampering, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. Brandy's face crumpled. I want a lawyer. That's your right. But I should mention that we have recordings of your conversations with Mr. Torino, documented evidence of the embezzlement, and now 23 witnesses to your confession about intercepting mail. The rescue boat arrived to evacuate Brandy at 10:30 a.m. As she waded out to the boat in borrowed clothes, carrying a garbage bag of wet belongings, the irony was perfect. The woman who'd spent months trying to force me out of the neighborhood was leaving in disgrace, while I stayed to help rebuild. But the final twist came when the county inspector arrived to assess structural damage. Mr. Torino, he said, examining my flood wall, this is the most impressive private flood mitigation I've ever seen. Would you be willing to consult on emergency retrofits for other developments? Elena squeezed my hand. What do you think? I looked out over the devastation that could have been prevented, then at the families who were alive because we'd prepared. I think, I said, it's time to make sure this never happens to anyone else. The rebuilding was about to begin, and this time it would be done right. 2 weeks later, the community center was packed again. But this time, it wasn't just Willowbrook residents. We had county commissioners, state insurance regulators, FBI agents, and news crews from 4 television stations. The smell of fresh coffee couldn't quite mask the underlying odor of flood damage that still clung to everyone's clothes. Brandy sat at a table near the front with her attorney, looking like she'd aged 10 years and 14 days. Her designer athleisure had been replaced by a rumpled business suit, and her usual confidence had evaporated completely. The hearing was officially titled Emergency Public Safety Review, Willowbrook Estates Flood Response. But everyone knew what it really was, Brandy's public trial. County Commissioner Patricia Valdez called the meeting to order. We're here to investigate the flood response and determine if criminal negligence contributed to property damage and endangered lives. Sarah Beth Wilson was in the front row with her camera crew, live streaming to what she'd told me was over 200,000 viewers. The story had gone viral after her initial flood coverage, with hashtags like hashtag HOA corruption and hashtag flood wall vindication trending nationally. Agent Walsh took the microphone first. The FBI investigation has uncovered systematic fraud involving $1.44 million in embezzled flood mitigation fees and conspiracy to deny insurance claims. Mrs. Ashworth collected money specifically for flood protection, while knowing that protection would never be provided. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even 2 weeks later, the scope of the betrayal was hard to process. Commissioner Valdez looked directly at Brandy. Mrs. Ashworth, you have the right to remain silent, but this is your opportunity to explain your actions to the community you served. Brandy's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head and stood up. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I never intended for anyone to get hurt." "Speak up," called someone from the back. "I said I never intended for anyone to get hurt," Brandy's voice cracked. "The flood risk seemed so small, and the development company assured us the drainage was adequate. I thought we could use the fees for community improvements that everyone could see." Mrs. Martinez stood up in the audience. "My daughter lost everything in her room. Family photos, school projects, her grandmother's jewelry. Where exactly did our flood protection money go?" Brandy's composure finally broke completely. "Kitchen renovation, car payments, down payment on a vacation property." She was crying now. "I know how it sounds, but we were struggling financially, and the money was just sitting there." "Our money was sitting there," Mike Stevens shouted. "Money we paid specifically to protect our homes." The room erupted in angry voices until Commissioner Valdez called for order. That's when I stood up. "Commissioner Valdez, I have something to say." The room went quiet. Even the news cameras turned toward me. 3 weeks ago, I sent certified letters to every house in Willowbrook, warning about flood risks and offering to help with protection. Mrs. Ashworth intercepted and destroyed those letters. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Brandy's confession. Her voice filled the room. "I can't tell them now. They'll blame me for everything." The silence was deafening. Commissioner Valdez looked at Brandy with disgust. "You prevented your own neighbors from protecting themselves." "I was trying to prevent panic." "You were covering your own crimes," Mrs. Patterson shouted. "You let us think Jake was the problem when he was trying to save us." Agent Walsh stepped forward again. "Mrs. Ashworth, based on evidence gathered during the flood and this public hearing, you're being formally arrested for mail tampering, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and embezzlement of public funds." As FBI agents moved to handcuff Brandy, someone in the back yelled, "What about our houses? What about the families who lost everything?" Commissioner Valdez addressed the crowd. "The county is establishing an emergency fund for flood victims. Additionally, we're filing a lawsuit against Cromwell Insurance to void the fraudulent policy exclusions." That's when Mrs. Vanessa stood up. She'd been quiet through the whole hearing, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who'd survived worse things than corrupt HOA presidents. "Mr. Jake," she said in her careful English, "you save many families. You show us what real community means." The applause started slowly, then built until the entire room was standing. Even the news crews were clapping. Commissioner Valdez smiled for the first time all day. "Mr. Torino, on behalf of the county, I'd like to offer you a position as emergency preparedness consultant for vulnerable communities throughout Colorado." Elena squeezed my hand and whispered, "What do you say?" I looked at Brandy being led away in handcuffs, then at the families who were alive because we'd chosen preparation over appearance. "I say it's time to build some more walls." The place erupted in cheers as Brandy disappeared through the back door, her reign of suburban terror finally over. The mural was Elena's idea. Standing in my backyard this morning, watching neighborhood kids add finishing touches to the artwork covering our flood wall, I had to admit she was right about making something beautiful from something practical. The concrete barrier that Brandy once called an eyesore now displayed a vibrant celebration of preparation, community, and second chances. The criminal trial had been swift and satisfying. Brandy pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges and received 4 years in prison plus full restitution. Her husband lost his insurance license, and Cromwell Insurance paid a $15 million settlement to flood victims while facing federal investigation in 12 states. But the real victory wasn't Brandy's downfall. It was what grew in its place. Willowbrook Estates became something unprecedented, a development that actually protected its residents. With settlement money and proper management, we installed state-of-the-art flood mitigation systems, early warning networks, and emergency shelters. The community that was once divided by fear and lies now worked together like a seasoned disaster response team. Elena's cancer remained in remission, and coordinating flood relief efforts had given her renewed purpose. She started a support group for families recovering from both natural disasters and community betrayal, because apparently those traumas share surprising similarities. "How many communities are you helping now?" she asked, stepping back to admire a painted rainbow emerging from storm clouds. 15 in Colorado, 3 in Wyoming, and 2 in New Mexico," I said. Turns out there are lots of developments built in danger zones, with leaders who care more about appearances than safety. My consulting business, Torino Community Safety Solutions, had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We didn't just build flood walls. We taught communities how to identify corruption, demand transparency, and protect themselves from both natural disasters and human greed. The real transformation, though, was in the people. Mrs. Vanessa had been elected as the new HOA president, running on a platform of no more secrets. Her first act was establishing monthly financial transparency meetings, where every expense over $50 was discussed publicly. Tom Bradley started a neighborhood emergency response team that trained families in disaster preparation. Mike Stevens, who'd initially opposed my flood wall, became our most enthusiastic advocate and helped secure county funding for similar protection in vulnerable areas. Even Mrs. Patterson found her voice, testifying before the state legislature about HOA financial oversight and helping pass new laws requiring public disclosure of all community fees and expenses. But the project I'm most proud of is the Willowbrook Preparedness Foundation. Using consulting profits and donations from communities we've helped, we provide free flood assessments for low-income neighborhoods and offer scholarships for veterans studying emergency management. Our first scholarship recipient was Maria Santos, a young veteran who'd lost her home in a flash flood in Pueblo. She's now studying hydraulic engineering at Colorado State, determined to prevent other families from experiencing what she went through. The best part about your flood wall, Elena said, brushing paint from her fingers, is that it's not ugly anymore. She was right. The community mural showed families helping families, hands reaching across floodwaters, and children playing safely on higher ground. At the bottom, in bright letters painted by Mrs. Vanessa's granddaughter, it read, "Preparation plus community equals hope." Yesterday, I got a call from a development in Arizona facing wildfire risks and an HOA president who sounded suspiciously familiar, missing fire mitigation funds, intimidation tactics, the whole playbook. Elena saw me grin while taking notes and gave me those steady eyes that had carried us both through our darkest times. "Another road trip?" she asked. "Looks like it." The work continues, because corruption and natural disasters never take breaks. But now we have something we didn't have before. Proof that communities can protect themselves when they stop trusting appearances and start demanding truth. Every morning, I drink coffee on the porch behind our transformed wall, listening to the peaceful sound of the creek that once nearly destroyed everything. Children play safely in yards that were underwater months ago. Neighbors actually know each other now, bonded by shared survival and the knowledge that they can face anything together. The wall still stands. The community grew stronger, and somewhere in federal prison, Brandy Ashworth is learning what real accountability feels like. What's your HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below. Your nightmare might help save someone else's home. If this story inspired you to check your own flood risk or HOA finances, smash that subscribe button and share this with anyone dealing with a power-hungry neighborhood dictator. Knowledge is the best flood protection of all.